Okay, the main purpose of the video is because if anybody's like me, they find it easier to listen to something than read something. Another purpose is to demonstrate my general innocence of any of the multiplicity of rumours that have gone around about me over the decades, claiming that I've been involved in untoward activity or I've been involved in pedophilia when I've actually been a victim of pedophilia. And not the perpetrator at any time. And to enlighten people in authority that they are actually facilitating by physical torture, by their intentional non-action to maintain the cruel status quo. And to detail the main elements of my physical suffering, which means I feel numerous other sparking, like what I feel on my nose, and I'll scratch my nose constantly. I'll tell you now that's because of the implants, not because I'm lying. So I feel constant other sparking apart from what I mentioned, and I feel radiation burns, which is evident that they're radiation burns from the other evidence. My pain is a direct result of being criminally ambushed for the express purpose of assaulting me, and this motive for assaulting me is gleaned from the fact that a police officer in New South Wales suicided because of his own guilt. His son felt anger towards me because his father suicided. His son, being a police detective, used every facility at his disposal to find out who in my life he could manipulate to act against me under threat of them being prosecuted by police. So I believe most people that have attacked me have done so because they're afraid of the police, because they've been told if they don't assault me, they'll be charged by police for some other thing, or they've been paid off through some government funding program illegally to participate in harming me. This will all be gleaned from the evidence. Police could clearly mount enough evidence for this particular purpose to put into a criminal court. The secondary effect of this video is because I want journalists to come to my aid. I want journalists to make public my plight, and I'm sure I'm probably not the only one that's suffering a similar problem. I believe that if this can happen to me, someone who's been involved in, had no dealings with the underworld, no dealings with crime, this can happen to an innocent party like me, it can happen to lots of other people. So another purpose is to provide evidence to police, the one or two police who are honest in the police departments who might like to criminally investigate these particular circumstances, which they are all obliged to under statute. Specifically, apart from state legislation, state crime legislation that says police are to prevent crime, Commonwealth legislation under the Criminal Code Act says police says the government has outlawed crimes against humanity, specifically the schedule of the Criminal Code Act 1995, Chapter 8 of the schedule, Division 268, headed in part Crimes Against Humanity. Division 268.12 speaks about severe deprivation of physical liberty. Division 268.13 outlaws torture. Division 268.20 outlaws persecution. Division 268.23 outlaws other inhumane acts, which is a general ballooning effect to gather everything else that doesn't fit anywhere else, which includes this. And Division 268.22 outlaws apartheid activity, where I point out that white people with a specific cultural background, as in families of Freemasons, can be just as racially discriminated against as any person from a Muslim country, where Freemasonry practice is not dissimilar to the Muslim way of life. So my name is Jeanette Francis. I'm 61. I was born in Cooma, New South Wales in 1956. I was the youngest of 4 children and we lived there till 1962. Jack Bassett was my dad's best mate in Cooma, New South Wales. Jack Bassett, like my father, was a Freemason. Jack Bassett was the local policeman in Cooma. There's probably other police, but Jack Bassett was certainly one of them. So both my father and Jack Bassett were Freemasons on the 3rd of March 1959 when I was brutally raped by my father. The 3rd of March was my parents' anniversary. My father came home drunk, punched my mother in the face. I yelled at him, despite being only 2. I thought I was a monster, I guess. Thought I was huge. Despite being only 2, I yelled at him and told him to leave my mother alone. So, like any rapist, he used rape as a power tool to dominate me and told me that he would teach me not to talk back to him ever again. Well, despite the fact that he hurt me quite a lot, it didn't stop me. I still talked back to him for the rest of the time that I spoke to him. My first child was born in early January 1974. I had a cut from the delivery of my child because I was too small to have a normal delivery. The nurses who cut my vagina area, they cut the opposite side to the tear. They spent a lot of time talking about it and decided specifically to cut on the opposite side to the tear. A few days after the birth, I was feeling the pain of the stitches in my vagina, and it caused me to remember quite acutely the pain that I felt after I was stitched up in 1959. When I spoke to my father about it, he became very aggressive. He threatened me. He threatened Dr. Bullock and said Dr. Bullock, basically it threatened Dr. Bullock's life with the force of his Freemason buddies. And then 1998, some 20-something years later, I found out that Dr. Bullock actually died in 1974. My first child was born in January 1974. So Dr. Bullock died after I confronted my father about my rape, and my father threatened him with the force of New South Wales Freemasons. I married a Mr. Peters in the mid-1970s. We parted in the 1980s, early 1980s. Mr. Peters, who was 3 years older than me, died in 2008. I cohabitated with a Mr. Hall from the mid-1980s. We parted company in mid-1990s. He died in 2010. He was 8 years younger than me. Early in the 1980s, I reported my father to the local New South Wales police where we were, that I suspected my father of indecently assaulting my 3 young sons. On the basis that my father was a Freemason, I didn't mention to the police officer he was a Freemason, but the police officer admitted that my father was a Freemason. On that basis, he refused to investigate, with the words to this effect: "You can forget about, he's a Freemason, you can forget about it, love," and refused to take my statement. In about circa 1985, the Cooma, New South Wales cop, Jack Bassett, suicided. I didn't realise he'd suicided. We went to his funeral as family because we knew their family, and I was having a cigarette outside when I was confronted by his son, Jack Bassett's son. Jack Bassett's son was an adult, older than me, and he was a police detective, so I found out. He pulled his police pistol from his chest holster under his jacket, pointed at me, threatening to kill me. He was saying words that I didn't understand, I couldn't comprehend. There was no logic in what he was saying, but he said to me something very specific. He said, "My dad died because of you." And even when he said that, I didn't realise he was Jack Bassett's son. I didn't really know anybody apart from Mrs. Bassett and the Bassett child, who was my age. And neither of them would talk to me at the wake. So I didn't really understand what was going on. So Jack Bassett's son told me that his dad died because of me. Later I was told that Jack Bassett suicided. When Detective Bassett, or he could be known by his mother's maiden name, when Jack Bassett's son was standing with his gun pointed at me, ready to shoot me, my mother stood in front of me to protect me. My father stood behind Detective Bassett, or whatever his name is, sniggering and giggling. He thought it was a great joke. So on June 30, hang on a second. Okay, from mid-1985 to 1986, or from about 1985, whenever it was. It's probably mid-1985. It was a Sydney funeral. Bassett used to live in Emu Plains, but they'd moved before the funeral. I used to send a Christmas card every year to the Bassetts. I think it was my subconscious making me do it. I never really understood why I kept sending them a Christmas card, but I did so they wouldn't forget me. So I think it was my little 2-year-old doing it. So Bassett suicided for whatever reason, allegedly because of me, but I would say it was moreover because of his own guilt, because he's a gutless scumbag. And in 1986, I woke one morning in my residence at 39 William Street, The Oaks, my Torrens title residence under my name, Jeanette Francis. I woke to find that I couldn't move my arms. I couldn't even lift my hand to my face. I couldn't even hold the weight of a coffee cup. I couldn't do anything. I was in incredible pain. The pain was in my back somewhere, but I couldn't really quite define exactly where it was. I was in so much pain, and I could feel a pulsating in my waist, in my spine, and I couldn't understand where this had come from. I went to bed and I was fine. I woke up and I'm in incredible agony, and my partner, Mr. Hall, didn't call the police. He didn't call the police either, but he didn't call any medical aid. So I had no pain relief, nothing, absolutely nothing. All he would give me was Panadol. So I was in this incredible pain. I couldn't understand where it was from, and I couldn't think because of the pain. So I was like that for a number of days. On the 30th of June 1987, last day of the financial year, I was 2 months pregnant. I was on my way to work at Favco Cranes in Prestons, Sydney. I was driving along Camden Valley Way. I was roughly at Catherine Field in Camden Valley Way, and a car, who I later identified being owned by one of my father's other Freemason friends from Campbelltown, New South Wales. His first name is Ken. Braked suddenly in front of me. Behind me was a large soil truck. I didn't hit the car in front of me. It was Ken McRae, now I remember. I didn't hit the car in front of me. The soil truck hit me. Initially it hit me square on, and then it swerved over to the left and hit me on the left quarter. And the impact on the left quarter caused me to spin. And by the time it hit me on the left quarter, the car that was in front of me that braked suddenly sped off into the distance and didn't stop. So I spun into the oncoming traffic, come resting about an inch away from the armour guard railing, about 2 foot in from the end of the armour guard railing. A car that was coming the other way, a brown Mitsubishi Colt, swerved off the road and aimed at the back of my car and impaled itself on the end of the armour guard railing. Despite the fact that I was the only person that was hit from the rear, I was charged with negligent driving. The negligent driving charge came to me in the mail several weeks later, and the signature as the police officer on a negligent driving charge was R for Ronald, last name Stevenson. My partner acted as if I should know who Ronald my partner acted as if I should know who R. Stevenson was. I didn't. Ronald Stevenson, as it turned out, was the chief police officer in charge of the investigations at the 1984 Milperra shootings between the Bandidos and the Comancheros motorcycle clubs at nearby Milperra. From Catherine Field to Milperra, without traffic, is about 15 minutes away. I had no immediate injury as a result of the car accident on the last day of the financial year in 1987, but I woke up the next morning with what doctors later described as severe whiplash, and because I was pregnant I couldn't take any painkillers, and I didn't even take Panadol because I was pregnant. So I challenged the negligent driving charge. And at the time in New South Wales, the court could order any case to arbitration. That Act of Parliament has been repealed. Can't happen anymore. Should never have happened in the first place. So the court sent my challenge for the negligent driving charge to arbitration. The arbitrator from Dignan and Hanrahan, a Mr. Bruce Hanrahan, sided with police. And police had claimed, and the truck driver claimed, that I had knocked the bumper bar and the tow bar from the truck, the soil truck, with the front of my TE Gemini. I had no damage to the front of my TE Gemini. The back was caved in and the subframe was bent, but absolutely no damage to the front. But the police officer and the driver of the RH or AH Baker truck claimed that I'd hit the truck with the front of the car, of my Gemini. Gemini had been repaired, subframe was straightened out, and it was repaired, and it was in primer grey. It was parked out the back of Hanrahan's office. And I told him, because I was facing the window, and I told Hanrahan if he just turned his head over his shoulder, he could look out the window and see my little yellow Gemini down there and see that it's in primer grey at the back and there's nothing wrong with the front. In fact, I offered him to walk down and have a look at the car, but he refused. So Hanrahan refused to look at the evidence. Instead, he found that I had hit the truck with the front of my Gemini, despite the evidence. So that was the first element of police corruption. So let's recap that a little bit. I was raped when I was 2, involving Freemasons. I can't remember any retaliation in the interim. Yet all of a sudden in 1987, after being accused of causing the suicide of Jack Bassett, here I am at the front of incredible corruption involving the court system and police officers who are traditionally Freemasons. So in 1989, skittle back a little bit, that particular arbitration ended in the beginning of 1988 after I'd given birth to the child. When that child was 3 months old in 1988, my father had indecently assaulted him. I found my father coming out of my sister's residence toilet with my baby in his arms. My baby was sobbing extremely deeply. He had a dummy covered in honey in his mouth, Honey was all over his face. His nappy was undone. He cringed when I took hold of him. And there was rash, blood rash on his anus and in his crease between his legs, around his genitals. There was a huge scene involving my mother, my sister's children, who are younger than my children. One of my sister's children, seeing that I was attacking my father for hurting my baby, sunk his teeth into my father's forearm, causing my father's arm to bleed. So he broke the skin. I went to police to report my Freemason father for assaulting my baby and potentially assaulting all of my father's descendants at that time in 1988. The Camden Police, which is the Camden Local Area Command in southern Sydney, had a number of detectives there that particular day. It was the last Sunday, I believe, in April 1988. A number of detectives, probably about 5, maybe 6, gathered around the table in the detectives' room where I was standing with Mr. Hall. And after a time, they admitted that my father was a fellow Freemason who had attended the Camden, New South Wales Freemason Lodge Temple. And on that basis, they refused to take my statement. Later on in 1988, I went to the Magistrates Court in Camden to file an apprehended violence order against my father to keep him away from all my children. Because at that stage I had 4 boys. And my father clearly is a pederast. He likes little boys' buttocks. After a while I remembered that as a young child I'd seen my father sexually penetrate my brother. In fact, my brother had come to me many times crying to tell me what my father had done to him and to show me the injury in his genital area. My brother doesn't remember this. I remember going to my mother, who told me that she was afraid of the Freemasons. So at the end of 1988, my father abducted the child that was born in 1974. The child was 14 years old. I went to police. They refused to take my statement. In the end, the Commonwealth Department of Social Security paid my parents child endowment for them to take care of the child they'd abducted. So I went to the Magistrates Court to file an apprehended violence order against my father to get my child back and to keep him away from my other children. Inside the court, on the first hearing of the apprehended violence order application, my father did a little dance, declared he was a Freemason and asked for help. That was his words, "You have to help me." This apparently is a ritual that Freemasons do when they're in trouble, seeking help from each other. The magistrate, who'd been a magistrate for a long time in Camden, New South Wales, looked at my father and considered the situation and said, "Yes, you're a Freemason, I'm a Freemason, we went to Camden Lodge together," which is something I wouldn't know unless this happened. "And okay, I'll help you. The magistrate turned to the court stenographer and said, "Don't record that, wipe it from the record," and then dismissed my application from the court. Later in 1989, rumour has it was on April Fool's Day, a book named Brothers in Arms was published. Despite the names of the authors declared, the clear authors of the book was about 50 Sydney, New South Wales police detectives. The book allegedly tells the story Brothers in Arms, the inside story of two motorcycle gangs, or something like that. The book tells that Ronald Stevenson, who later became a Superintendent Stevenson, was the senior detective at the Milperra shootings. Inside the book was a stolen photograph of me. The photograph was snapped when I was 30-something. In the mid-1980s. The photograph had me labelled as a person who was murdered during the Milperra massacre. Inside the book, the story claimed that a man had suicided because he received a card from me, a greeting card. Now, if you remember, I said I always sent Christmas cards to the Bassetts, the man who suicided in the mid-1980s, shortly before this book came out. Also in the book, there was a description of a man who lived a short stroll from my front door in the Oaks. He lived at 39 or 41 39 or 41 Mary Street, the Oaks, and I lived at 39 William Street, the Oaks. He's identified on the electoral roll as a police officer named Bob Bradbury. Well, that's not what he's called on the electoral roll, Bob, but Robert was certainly in his name. In the book, he's called Bob Bradbury, Sydney CIB. I believe, I put it to you, that Detective Bob Bradbury from the Sydney CIB stole my photograph from my residence in the Oaks, specifically to pervert the course of justice and publish my photo as the identity of an alleged murder victim, Leanne Walters, aged some 14 years my junior. Also in 1989, December, I opened up a computer shop where I custom built and repaired IBM compatible computers. Also repaired various other different computers from other platforms. I self-taught. Amongst my computer sales customers over the years, I operated the shop for several years, were many local police, senior detectives, as well as, well, I think actually most of them were detectives that were customers. And the police station themselves used to buy stationery on account from my shop. So regularly coming in and out of my shop from the time the book was published was numerous police from the Campton local area command. So in the end of 1990, at the beginning of 1991, at the end of 1990 to the beginning of 1991, I started having severe pain in my back. It was paralysing pain where I could hardly walk, And of course I couldn't get any painkillers from the local doctors. Local doctors, including Fred Yulin and Mohammed Ahmed, a Muslim, both general practitioners, and alleged Sydney Macquarie Street specialists and North Sydney specialists, all claimed the pain in my waist causing me inability to walk properly and numbness in my hands. The implants vibrating in my throat is what's making me cough. The doctors all claimed that the pain was due to a minor car accident that I'd had in Liverpool, New South Wales on the 3rd of April 1983. So the acute pain that I suffered in the late 1990s, early 1991, all the medical practitioners claimed was from an April 1983 car accident. What's that, 8 years earlier? And nothing like I consider to be pain associated with that car accident happened in the interim. I was driving a HQ Holden. Somebody rammed me up from behind at the traffics near the Twin Turbine business. Anybody would know where that is, who knows Liverpool. I was south of there. So I had my 3 children and my husband in the car with me. I was driving. None of us suffered any injury. But there we are 8 years later, and miraculously I've got this acute back pain, which is causing numbness in my hands. So how do you get lower back pain that causes numbness in your hands? Bullshit is what it is. Circa 1994, one of Sydney, New South Wales police detectives in the Brothers in Arms book apprehended me during a Camden Toastmasters meeting. This Camden Toastmasters meeting was held in the Campbelltown Catholic Club, both New South Wales. He had 2 uniformed New South Wales police officers, both males, with him, and they both drew their pistols on his command, and they pointed them at me as Detective Shields demanded I produce my identification. Now, Detective Shields is named in the Brothers in Arms book. A Detective Shields. This particular Detective Shields is the brother of Martin Shields. Martin was a fellow Toastmaster at the Camden Toastmaster meeting. So the only way I could know Martin Shields had a police detective brother would be because of this incident. It doesn't mention in the Brothers in Arms book that Detective Shields has a brother named Martin. So Detective Shields and my fellow Toastmaster members all believed, and the 2 flatfoots, all believed 100% that I was an associate of an outlaw motorcycle gang, and that I had faked my own death in 1984 during the Bandito and Comanchero shootout at Milperra. And their proof that I had done this was the book Detective Shields had in his hand, waving it at me. Opened it up and said, "There's a photo of you." And I responded with, "Yes, that's a photo of me, but that's not my name." And Detective Shields said to me, "If you don't show your ID, we're going to arrest you right now." So I pulled out my driver's license that I got in 1973, the year after I left high school, and that I got with my birth certificate, and I stuck it under his nose. and told him if he'd actually done his homework, he wouldn't be standing in front of me making a fool of himself. And Detective Shields responded in his arrogance, not with an apology, but with a threat. He promised to stalk me for the rest of my life, or his life, whichever come first. So when I was elected onto local government in 1995, and I was illegally sacked in 1999, numerous people in local government and state government claimed that I was an associate of an outlaw motorcycle gang, and that I had faked my own death in 1984, and their proof was Detective Shields' Brothers in Arms book. And not only that, police had identified me as being Leanne Walters, so therefore I must be Leanne Walters. So that was a bit of the background. There's a whole lot more, but that's the most prominent bits. So here's some of the specifics. As this process of surgical rape produces heat, and heat can be measured with thermal imaging, then that can be proved. However, I can't afford to buy a thermal imaging camera or the appropriate equipment, which would cost thousands of dollars to measure the small amount of increase in heat that I imagine would be caused from my body. Even though it feels like a lot to me, it's probably fairly small. I know you can buy small cameras that fit onto an Android phone, but I don't believe they would have the capabilities to, I think they can measure 2 degrees difference, but I don't know, I don't want to waste my money on something that's not going to actually produce the results. I also have an Android app that can pick up sound. I have intermittent popping in my throat and in my head and in my ear that I didn't know whether it was audible to others. I can hear it and feel it, like physically feel it and hear it at the same time. But I didn't know it was recordable until I got the Android app that told me that it was audible as well. But the Android app doesn't record the sound. So I've approached various television stations trying to offer a story in exchange for the use of their equipment to prove the sound's coming from me. But the TV networks, Channel 10, Channel 9, Channel 7 and the ABC, have all treated me like I'm an idiot, or someone's intercepted all my communications, even my personal communications, to the TV stations, claiming that XYZ, and that's why they can't tell the story. These attacks on my person prove that a serious ethics breach has occurred with the use of devices cleared for use under the Australian Therapeutic Goods Association, or Therapeutic Goods Acts, and the associated legislations. So despite the therapeutic goods legislations, despite criminal law, despite the Criminal Code Act for the Commonwealth, that are all meant to protect Australians from this same sort of ethical abuse, the 2GA, which is a Commonwealth department under the Health Department, have refused to address my situation. Not only that, when I wrote to them about it, they told me I had to actually name the devices before they could investigate them. So that indicates quite conclusively that there is absolutely nothing in place to protect people from criminal abuse of therapeutic goods equipment. These equipment under therapeutic goods legislation are called active implantable medical devices. They're also called high-risk devices because their risk is from infection causing death. These active implantable medical devices are only used for patients as a last resort. So for someone who has nothing clinically wrong with them, to be implanted with a high-risk medical device is prima facie intent to kill. The last two South Australian Ministers for Health that I've approached over these, my inability to get these items diagnosed and removed, have literally sicked the medical health staff onto me in an attempt to shut me up by detaining me under the Mental Health Act. One of them succeeded, and I was illegally detained under the Mental Health Act in a process that was, because I had ordered them off my property, they said they were detaining me because they couldn't diagnose me as having a mental illness, which is clear breach of the Act. And not only that, I have the two confessions on videotape. I was holding the video camera for the most part, and one of my friends was holding it for the second confession. Despite the two confessions from the same psychiatrist that she had criminally breached the Mental Health Act to detain me, I've been unable to get a resolve to the situation. Police refused to charge the psychiatrist for criminal assault and unlawful imprisonment, and I've been unable to get the matter into a civil court under my common law rights because the registrar in the Adelaide court refused to accept my submission in my statement of claim. And the free community legal advice centres refused to assist me with legal advice. All of the free community legal advice centres, including the University of Adelaide. In the medical imagery that prove I have the implants, the 2 CTs, and the MRI, out of the 6 medical practitioners involved, 5 got their medical degrees at the Adelaide University. So here, near my fontanelle, where you can see the hair poking up, which it pokes up all the time, doesn't sit down. Where the hair pokes up, it's painful when the follicles move on the scalp. It's painful in that area all the time. It feels swollen. Sometimes it gets so hot, I have to put ice packs on my head. I have to tie my hair up when I'm outside because if my hair blows around in the wind, it's extremely painful. So that's at the fontanelle to the left. The pain's over to the right as well. It's mostly on the left. And that location, when the time comes, I'll shave my head and it'll be seen on that location is where there's a scar, because that's where the implants were inserted in 1997 when I was an elected member of local government and living in a rental accommodation owned by a police family at 1 Swain Drive, Wilton, New South Wales. So that hurts all the time there. Further at the back near the crown, there's a lumpy area that feels like it's tapping. It's like tap, 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 constantly. Sometimes it's more than others. A little bit down the back of the head, about here, where the scalp pokes out the most, it does the same thing. This sensation is between the bone and the skin. It's not under the skin, it's between the bone and the skin. I don't doubt that there's something actually on my brain because I remember being subjected to brain surgery. I remember being kidnapped from outside the Camden Council chamber, New South Wales, during at the beginning of my first MacRock meeting I was to chair when I was elected member of Wollondilly. And I remember coming to sit down at the meeting and people talking about how long it was before the meeting had started, even though in my mind there was no delay. And I remember thinking how different I felt to when I arrived, despite the fact that I'd only drunk coffee. And I remember when I opened my mouth to speak, all that came out was one syllable and I couldn't talk at all. And I remember talking to the officer that was employed by MacRock, and she conducted the rest of the meeting. I remember calling to my comrades in council, Camden, New South Wales, Wollondilly, New South Wales, and Campbelltown, New South Wales, and saying as loudly as I could, which was a whisper, "Help me." I remember they all, the councillors and the MacRock officer, all just looked at me stony-faced without any reaction at all, which indicated to me that they had all participated in my surgical rape. So I always, since the surgical rapes in the 1990s, when I was a local government member, I always have the sensation of vibration and sparking on my face. I always have the sensation of being clawed down the side of my head from the fontanelle to the ear. And that's reflected in the MRI, where the MRI from the 5th of May 2006 has taken the side of my head because it only shows half of my nose. And it specifically shows the implants down the side of my head. So I always have this sparking and vibration around my face, mostly around my nose, which causes me to scratch my nose constantly. More so, it seems, when I'm talking to someone. But the vibration is vibration under my skin and the hair moving, and there's a lot of sparking going on. I feel it mostly on the tip of the nose. I can feel what feels like cable under the nose, sparks across my cheek and into my eyeballs, goes up to my ear, comes down from my jaw into my mouth, cables both mouth, extensive sparking on the chin where there's 2 scars from where it was drilled around the time Diana died, the week after Princess Diana was killed in the car accident. That's when I was surgically assaulted in my chin. They drilled 2 holes there, sealed it up with super glue, and it wept for ages. I've got fine cables in my jaw. I've got a large lump in my jaw, and something vibrates on my tongue. It vibrates in my throat. I can feel something clicking in my throat intermittently, as I've said, which I believe is from various implants, which I'll describe in a minute. So on the back of my neck, all the time, right there at the back of my neck, next to my left ear, right here at the back of my neck, the base of my brain, all the time, it feels like someone's just hit me across the back of the head, all the time. So I've got the pain from that causing headache, and the pain from these things up the side of my head causing headache, and the pain from the tapping at the back of my head and the back of the skull, and the pain from the fontanelle part here. And occasionally I get a bit of pain at the forehead where there's a divot where it looks like something has penetrated my skin and my forehead. All this pain causes constant headache. I never don't have headache. I can lessen it with painkillers, but I try not to take painkillers so as it doesn't destroy my stomach lining and so I don't become dependent on it. Sometimes after waking in the morning, I blow blood in my tissues. Like one of the videos, sometimes the blood's a lot. And sometimes it's just covered with a bit of mucus. But it seems to go in cycles. You get a little bit, builds up, then there's a lot. A little bit, builds up, and there's a lot. I always feel pain from the sparking in my cheeks. It indicates to me probably some of the cables or something has gone along my sinuses. I feel like I can't breathe properly, like something's blocking my nose. I went to an ENT who, without asking me, shoved a bendable cable down my nose and said, "See, it's not blocked, there's nothing wrong with you." And that was the extent of that. They're so fucking rude, it's not funny. Sometimes my nose bleeds without a reason. It bled when it was first implanted. When it first happened was in 1997 when I was in One Swain Drive. And that's since then I've had the problems in the nose. I actually woke up during one of the surgical procedures. I woke up in massive pain when someone was shoving something into my face. So it was probably when they were shoving it into my nose. So I was awake during that surgery when they were shoving something in my nose. And I was awake during the surgery when they were digging in my brain and told me if I didn't cooperate I'd be brain dead. I remember during one of the procedures my teeth were constantly chatting. I couldn't stop my teeth from chatting. And I remember other things that happened. So, as I was saying before, the pain in the back of my neck. On the 17th of November 2005, I was hit with a massive force of energy. The force of energy was so strong it pushed me forward in the seat, literally, pushed me forward. My first instinct was to get up and run. My second instinct said, "Don't run or you'll die." So I sat back down and I felt electrical current ravaged through my brain. It zapped around my brain a couple of turns and then threw itself down my spine, down my back. And since then, my body has been enlivened with this electrical energy. The strange thing is that I get a vibration feeling, localized vibration in my ear, like in the back of my ear. Remembering that I found a cut in the back of my ear in 1991 when I was pregnant. I get this vibration in the back of my ear which seems to meet up with the pain in the back of my neck. Now, the outer ear, I think it's called the pinna, also vibrates. When I cover my ear, it vibrates and sparks, like I feel sparks in it. So when I cover my outer ear, you expect that you hear your blood pulsing. But instead, what I hear is a rapid. I have low blood pressure. There's no way my blood pressure would be rapidly beating. I feel the clink in my throat. The contraction or whatever it is in my throat, like a hit. After my throat has clunked, I feel an enlivening as if something's been switched on in here. And between that, my diaphragm contracts, forcing me to suck in air. It generally happens in the early hours of the morning when I'm asleep in bed, but it also happens during the day. I feel it more in the early hours of the morning because I'm motionless. so I feel it more then. But when this is enlivened in my diaphragm area, my lower ribs, my left hand side, if I put my hand over my left ear, it stops the enlivenment in my diaphragm, my lower ribs. The phrenic nerve stimulator is a device that has an antenna in the research material on the diaphragm on the lower ribs on the side. Where I have the lump. The phrenic nerve, P-H-R-E-N-I-C, is used for people who can't breathe properly apparently, like Krista Reeves, the Superman of the 80s, who became paralysed. So I feel the clunk in my neck, forced air in my diaphragm, and immediately after, the enlivenment or the sparking and vibrating in my lower ribs, right there. Right where they say on the diagram, you'll see in a minute. Another device associated with this particular area in your throat and neck is the hypoglossal nerve, which is hypoglossal stimulation techniques using artificial implants is associated with people with sleep apnea. A spinal nerve pulse generator was probably inserted, the phrenic nerve devices were inserted in the 1990s when I was a member of local government, 1997 and on. The spinal nerve pulse generators in my back were inserted when I was pregnant in 1991. Before local government. The diagram that I'll place in this video shows the location where they generally cut your spine to put the spinal nerve stimulators, which is roughly in the location where I feel the constant sparking under my bra strap. The pulse generator that they use for the spinal nerve stimulator traditionally goes in a pocket above your buttocks, one or the other side. On the centre of my buttocks is a cut that had stitches when I was pregnant in 1991, and on my tailbone I constantly feel the vibrations that extends into my genital area. I'm not really sure what goes down my legs, but I feel the pulses in either side of my genital crease going down into my legs. I feel the pulses movement. I feel pulse under my buttocks, both sides, when I'm sitting down trying to watch TV. And I feel a sensation that is really hard to describe on my legs. If I had hair on my legs, I could say my hair was standing up on end. But as there's no more hair on my legs, which has obviously been scorched off because the legs have been flooded with radiation, as I've no hair on my legs, I can't say my hair is standing up on end. So what I feel, I can roughly attribute to a sucking sensation, but I feel it vertically across, I feel it horizontally across my shins. The shins actually vibrate within themselves in the localized area, and the shins heat up. You can physically feel the heat. So this would be an area for a thermal camera to have a look at. I can feel ridges in my shins. When I run my hand up my shin, I can feel ridges. When I run my fingers over my knee, I can feel the ridge, the cable. and you'll see in one of my other videos, I show you how that you can set a cable move under the skin. It's harder to see on the shin, and my legs have got really, really large when they shouldn't have large calf muscles. The calf muscles are really huge. So whatever it is that's in my legs is causing excess radiation to burn the hair off my skin. So the only thing that I can think of would be causing excess radiation would be that my legs have created a magnetic field of some sort to enable them to be the aerial, to be able to communicate with the device remotely that operates the implants that are implanted inside of me. Because the remote device for people that have active implantable medical devices is meant to be used within arm's length of the person who has the implants. So when someone remotely from the person who has the implants wants to use this control unit, they'd need a larger aerial. Therefore, my legs have become the aerial. That's why I have no hair on my legs. That's why I feel a sucking sensation on my legs. So I'm skipping around a little bit. Back to the thoracic area in my spine. In the winter time, that area becomes so hot in my bed because you put a lot of covers on in your bed in winter. It becomes so hot that I've got to lay on my stomach and take the covers off my back in the dead of winter because my back is burning up so much I can't stand it any longer. So you can imagine how uncomfortable it is in summertime. And the more I have over my skin, the more the skin heats up, but the less I feel the tapping. So it's a bit of a catch-22 situation. Recently I sold my little dog. My little dog shakes its ears. The dog before that used to shake its ears too. The cat used to shake its ears. The cat's now deaf. The old dog's dead. But the new little dog shakes its ears, just like the other two animals. And they all shook their ears whenever they were near me, the three of them. The deaf cat does every now and then shake its ears, but not very often anymore. And as well as the dog shaking its ears, I can feel an excess amount of sparking when I'm near the dog. So it seems to me somebody has trespassed on my property, trespassed on my animals, the three of them, and implanted them all with some device that activates or interacts with the implants inside me to cause us all pain and discomfort. So I sold my little dog, hoping to give it a better life than being tortured along with me. I sold the dog on Gumtree in March 2017, selling it because I thought that somebody who bought a dog would be a loving home for the dog. They returned the dog on Mother's Day 2017, and the mother of the girl who bought the dog made a point of pulling out a t-shirt that she said she bought for the dog, which I might add is too small for the dog. And the t-shirt says on it, "Woke up like this." Now, considering that I've been saying in my various publications for many years that I woke up with these implants, and only just started saying the dog has been implanted as well. For someone who's a stranger who would come to me and give me a t-shirt that says "woke up like this" and then laugh, indicates to me either they know my stalkers personally before they bought the dog, or they become familiar with my stalkers after they bought the dog, and on the basis that the dog causes me pain and injury, they returned the dog to me. Finally, the photo of my foot on my web page. That's a genuine photo along with all my photos. They're all genuine. I haven't done anything to any of them. I have to be at like 50 photos consecutively of my feet this particular day because they were pulsating painfully. So I kept snapping photos of my feet, knowing that digital cameras see things that the eye can't see, and only one photo showed the glowing. The pulsing has long stopped in my feet, indicating that whatever it was, it's run out of battery and it can't be recharged, which makes me think it's a Vion, which is also on my page. My web page. However, the lump of the item is still in my feet. I can feel it when I walk, like I'm walking on stones, but the stones are under my skin. I just want to reiterate that these items weren't put there for research purposes. They weren't for the greater good. These items were used specifically to torture me. These items were used to retaliate against me because Jack Bassett suicided. And Jack Bassett's son, I put it to you, approached everybody he could think of through digging in my life, who he thought he could threaten with arrest if they didn't cooperate to harm me. Now, any police officer that supports Jack Bassett's son and his friends in their quest to harm me in any way whatsoever are, in my opinion, spineless mongrels. Because Jack Bassett suicided over his guilt for turning his back on a 2-year-old child. Had nothing to do with me. It was Jack Bassett's guilt for his inaction because he was afraid of his fellow Freemasons and didn't have the courage to stand up to them. Jack Bassett allowed my father, Jack Bassett, and all his Freemason friends, which include Freemasons from Cooma and Freemasons from Camden and Freemasons from Canberra, they all allowed my father to go on for decades and rape every single one of his descendants